15 years, actually 20 now. I've got to think of the 5 I'm here. My role in my last airport, I was the Deputy Director of Engineering and Facilities. So I'm very, very familiar with the way airports breathe is a better word. How the flow through the airport, security, how passengers move around. And I think I was more than qualified to take on the phase 2 of the project. I was not here for phase 1 of the project.
In terms of the errors, I think identified, it was stated that it appeared at first glance that RS&H seemed qualified on paper, but certainly in terms of the actual performance on their part, their performance left something to be desired. There were, I'm trying to find it, forgive me for hopping around, but the chairman elected me to go first, so I have to make sure I'm on point. There were issues either with the design, managing the costs associated with the contracts. There was issues with the tendering for contracts. There were issues with contract administration. There were challenges with the various designs which had to be amended. Why did we seemingly allow RS&H to continue as lead consultant on this project, given the number of issues that seemingly were identified perhaps from very early on? I note that to date, whilst litigation perhaps has been discussed, there's been no decision to challenge RS&H on the works delivered. But I think the outstanding question that I have is, how was it allowed to continue for so long, is my question. Yeah.
So I can only speak from July 2016 when I arrived. I spent maybe two weeks with my predecessor. But in 2016, when I identified what was going on in the project, probably took 2 to 3 months before I realized that the design team was very fragmented. There was not a lot of synergy between them, and I was playing a major role in trying to get those all to work together. So to answer your question, when a major project starts and you have a design entity, you try to work with them to try and see if you can help them up and get them to do what they need to do. So that was my primary role at the beginning. 5 months in, I think it was 5, maybe 6 months, the project manager for RS&H, I got a phone call on a Monday morning, said he was let go. So obviously there was a lot of dissatisfaction behind the scenes there at the consultant level. So again, coming back to your question, to release the design entity at that stage where we've got an active contractor constantly hounding for requests for information, submittals, answers to anything. To release that would have stopped the project. It may have taken a week, it may have taken a month, but it would have stopped the project. And by stopping the project, you would then gone into a contractual delay, and the meter would have then started to tick. So there's always this optimism that you can work through the problems with the design team. Unfortunately, I believe that we went through the third project manager of RS&H. was actually quite good, but he was basically digging out of a hole at that point. But he brought it to the end. So that's the reasons why you would not get rid. They would have to be so bad that then all hope is lost. But that wasn't the case with RSNH.
The project, from a cost management perspective, had an outline business case that was prepared in 2014, approved by the Cabinet on the 5th of August 2014, and then by the FCO on the 15th of August 2014. But the actual start of the project didn't occur until a year later, in September 2015, Phase 1, with Phase 2 beginning in May 2016. Again, from a cost management perspective, there was no final business case offered up on this project as well to give the assessment steering committee or even the board of directors of the Cayman Islands Airports Authority anything more than estimated costs. I wonder if you might be, and again, this final business case obviously and the absence thereof may have happened before your arrival, but certainly from your experience in previous capital projects, how important in the overall cost management process do you believe a final business case is necessary as part of the procurement rules to ensure effective value for money is achieved in capital projects of this size, in your experience?
So to answer your question, it's very, very important. A final business case is taking the tendered prices and applying them to get an approval to move forward. But it also gives a chance to also add the things that you need to add, which not necessarily would be shown in the OBC. For instance, with the airside projects, which we've just finished, the final business case showed two contingencies. It shows the contingency for want of additional things, but it also shows the contingency for risk. With the airside project, there was this risk of when you dig a hole, you could, because Cayman is limestone, you could hit, caverns. So I think the FBC for the airport, if it had shown the risk outlined in the OBC, which was put together by PwC, which is very normal, 25%. I would have gone a little bit higher if it was me. Again, I think we would have had a much better, what's the word? It would have looked a lot better. So.
I asked my final question on this point. I asked this question of the CEO when he gave testimony earlier on, and he indicated he thought it was a good idea and he would move it forward. But given that the airport in particular, to your point, is presently engaged in another project works, the airside, the terminal, which is what the report is based on, was the first project, but the second project now is the airside, and we also heard that there are other expansion projects either planned or expected in the not too distant future. Most immediately, I think, will be the terminal again in terms of space because of the expansion and growth of the attractiveness, if you will, as a jurisdiction, and therefore the ability to move passengers, both tourist and domestic. It was recommended that a post-project evaluation be conducted on the lessons learned, both from a governance framework as well as perhaps the strategic outline case, the outline business case, and then a final business case on costing and all of that. Would you agree that a post-project evaluation would be useful, particularly in terms of ongoing future projects that the Airports Authority may see itself engaged in?
So, absolutely. This is very normal to have a closeout of the project, is to look at lessons learned. I believe the MPO is starting to look at that. The MPO is now that I finished the SI projects, the only active project we've got at the moment is in construction is the school. But the MPO is growing, and we are trying to put some standards together. And one of those would be a post-project look as to how we can support our clients, in this case the airport authority, and do better.
Can you explain to the committee what your engagement terms of reference were to the airports authority?
So engagement, I was the senior project manager for the terminal expansion and the airfield projects. I was directly responsible for the steering committee meetings to present to the steering committee on the progress of the project, and also to present to the board. The board at the beginning, when I first arrived, was once every couple of months, but as the project evolved, that escalated into once a month, and it's been like that ever since for the last 3.5 years. So my role as the senior project manager is to look after the interests of the authority during the project.
Would that have included a review of the drawings to make sure that they were complete prior to signing contractual contracts and whatnot?
So again, that was before I arrived. The contract was signed in the May. But to give you an example, this is very standard practice that during the airfield project, I get the final tender drawings. I do a page turner with the client. So I would literally go through every page to see if that's something they want. Now, the technicalities, there's certain things I can look at, but some things I'm not qualified to do. For instance, the electrical piece. So you can only do so much because you're actually employing the design entity for their expertise to put these drawings together.
It seems that nobody had any responsibility to make sure that the design drawings were anywhere close to reality, because the CEO gave evidence this morning that his best guess that they were only 75% complete. And we've had several witnesses talk about this complicated project, but it's not really a complicated project. It's mostly a single-story building, and it has some mostly open areas, and it has two belts that one takes baggage out and one brings baggage in. So I mean, it's not that complicated. It's not a 10-story building that we're doing, and so why was it possible for the consultant people, RH&S, to deliver drawings that were accepted that were only 75% complete?
So let me go back to your point about a complicated building. Yes, from a physical standpoint, it does not look complicated. But the complications in this project was, or is, in any airport that is operational. This terminal was ripped apart, and meanwhile allowing passengers to leave the parking lot and get on a plane and get off a plane and get back to the parking lot. That's the complication, with the security access line constantly moving, channeling people through from a security standpoint, checking them in much, much smaller footprints while we're building. That was the complication. Now, I can't speak for the drawings. I'm surprised that there wasn't some sort of oversight, or certainly a conversation with RS&H such that they would do a page turner with the client, with individual departments, for instance, the security department, to understand if what they've designed actually works for them. So I think that there was a miss there early on before contract signing.
I understand that the former senior project manager was asked to do a cost review in 2018. Did you ever have sight of that cost review?
I did.
How much did that cost review differ from the original
So
contract? And was the cost review after the contract was signed or before the contract? I would think it would be after it was in February 28.
that's correct, yeah. It was Denise Stabler, it was the previous, the Stabler report, as I refer it. It was pretty much a report on what happened prior to July 2016. And how the cost piece of that is how it grew from 51.9 to 56.2. A lot of the content of that report was about how RSNH failed to deliver certain things that were needed, one of those being the baggage handling system, which was a huge impact on the phase 2. So the report wasn't just costs, it was also about the state of the project leading up to July 2016.
But the report, given the final figure that we were given this morning of 74 million, it doesn't seem to have had a very controlling effect on the overspend, the review.
Well, the review was done in 2018. It would not have any effect on
Okay. When, I understand there was a bill, the original contract included a bill of quantities, right? When there were changes to the design, whether as a result of decisions made by the board or by the steering committee, how was the pricing of those changes calculated?
So if there's a change that perhaps the contractor, it could be the contractor, it could be the designer, it could be the client that instigates a change. So if it was, say, the contractor, they would put in a variation instruction request and they would add a ROM, a rough order of magnitude. So that ROM then would be logged in our spreadsheet, or rather the QS's spreadsheet, and then once the job had been done, or if it could be, sometimes we didn't know if the variation, what the cost of that variation would be until it was completed. So the variations are it's as the project evolved, RSNH and the cost consultant were very slow in responding, probably because there was no money in the project for them. For the last year of the project, they weren't getting paid, but they had a contractual obligation to finish. So it was very difficult sometimes to get information out of the RSNH team.
When the contractor did a ROM, right, was that ROM signed off on site by yourself, by some member of the steering committee, or by CIAA staff to ensure that what was sent for the cost consultants, JEC, to pay was close to accurate? Or was it just, or were they allowed, once you approved an ROM, to go directly to the cost consultant to get paid?
So the cost consultant would sign off on the change, and there was never any signage from me or Mr. Albert. We looked at the monthly requisition at the changes based on what the cost consultant came up with, and that's when we would agree.
So you all did not certify the need for a change before they were allowed to, you relied on a monthly report from the cost consultants,
That's correct.
but what was your role as project manager if it wasn't to ensure that something that was being asked for was justified and cost properly, and that if they said they were going to use 20 blocks, they actually used 20 blocks and not 10?
But that's what the cost consultant's for. That's what we're employing them for, is to be our gatekeeper on these costs. I'm not qualified to count the blocks, as it were.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I may just pick up on the point of cost, and certainly I think time delays as it relates to the project completion. I think the Auditor General's report indicated that the project was estimated to be largely completed by the end of 2018, but not fully completed until the end of February 2019. The changes relating to the delays in the completion date were many. Phase 1, the project was supposed to start April 2015, but it didn't start until 2 months later. This was largely because of the delay in establishing or developing the outline business case. The consultancy services, cost, and contracts were due to start in October 2014, but because RS&H lacked the necessary company registrations, it didn't start until 3 months after the fact. Obtaining building control unit approval for the electrical works were delayed some 36 weeks because of deficiencies in the drawings provided by RS&H. And then, of course, the big one, as you just pointed out, the awarding of the contract for the baggage handling system was delayed a further 10 months because of poor tender materials, again prepared by RS&H. In these circumstances, and if I may be so bold, particularly in this time of year, which is an election year, persons like to have someone to blame. And usually that person to blame is the government. Certainly in this case, a project that was estimated to cost $51.9 million, but when it was all said and done, as we heard today, $74.03 million, an increase of some 35% in cost overruns. It's easy to point your finger and blame the government and say, well, here's another example of government contracting. But page 54 of the Auditor General's report, sorry, page 18 of the Auditor General's report, paragraph 54, seeks to draw out the culprit in this blame game question. Paragraph 54, which is found on page 18, states that in February 2018, the former senior project manager was reappointed to review the estimated cost of the project submitted by the consultants with a view of identifying the reasons for variations from the original estimate and identifying whether they were a result of, 1, a change in scope requested by the client, and we know there were many. Certainly the Airports Authority, according to the report, were responsible for 6 major changes. But likewise, RS&H, we understood from testimony, were responsible for 412. Or was it the result of errors or mistakes in the original plans, many of which may be attributed to RS&H? I've made a number of statements based on the report that seems to point a finger at RS&H, but presumably you were reappointed in February 2018 to answer this question. What was your determination?
No, that wasn't me.
It wasn't?
That was the Denise Stabler report.
Oh, I see. I apologize. I apologize. Well, maybe I'll get the opportunity to ask that question to someone else. Forgive me.
As sorry, excuse me. Senior project manager, did your office give any consideration or make any recommendation to the Cayman Islands Airports Authority that they should retain their own cost consultant?
Yes. It's very, very normal to have the cost consultant working for the owner, because that's basically the senior project manager's wingman or wingwoman. to work through the lead consultant, you have no control over the cost consultant. Everything has to go through the lead. So yes, absolutely. That would be a recommendation from the MPO from future projects to have.
My question is, did you recommend it for this project, and the steering committee said no, they would prefer to have it working for the lead consultant?
So again, I was here in 2016. Those decisions would have been made much prior to that.
Yeah, but it is never too late to correct a decision when you're having this kind of inflation.
I don't recall ever saying that. Again, you know, it's to switch cost consultants midstream. Again, there's a huge learning curve to understand what is going on. I do know that the cost consultant was hired late in the early stages, which is that makes very vulnerable to mistakes because the cost consultant doesn't grow with the design. So no, I would not recommend releasing the QS and getting somebody else midstream. For the same reason, I wouldn't release the design team.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
I just want to go back to the question that I asked in terms of the question that was put to the former senior project manager, and I thank you for the correction that it was not you. But as I understand it, the former senior project manager, I think you stated her name, is Denise Stabler.
Correct.
She would have been preparing this answer for you, or the project manager. So whilst you didn't answer this question as to whether or not the reasons for variations and the reasons for the cost overruns, whether they were as a result of a change of scope by the client or as a result of mistakes made in the original plans, she provided that answer which you are familiar with. Could you inform this committee what her conclusion was to that specific question?
So the Denise Stabler report, the cost evaluation was only from the 51.9 to the 56.2, which is shown in the audit report. She had no idea what was going on once she left. So the report, which was drawn up in 2018, was for us, the MPO, to get a full understanding as what was going on at that time, to try and identify what was happening or what had happened.
But why was she asked to evaluate that when that was driven by a board decision? We were given evidence this morning that 5-point-something million was a board decision based on them wanting to reinsert things that they had taken out for budgetary constraints.
Well, again, I wasn't here, but maybe, there was, I don't know.
Okay.
To your point, Mr. Chairman, certainly paragraph 18, page 10, outlines that the report stated that the board requested a number of changes, including upgrading the hurricane glass, including canopies for the passengers. But these were, again, to the chairman's point, requested by the board for upgrades, but certainly not accounting for the significant increases in costs. But I just wanted to provide that clarification that that's clearly stated in the report.
Can you explain, right, how it has taken this long to come to a final account for a project that was basically operational 2 years ago?
So in end of July 31st, 2019, the project ended. The cost consultant, RS&H, were to supply us with the final account within 3 to 6 months. 6 months goes by and we are no further forward. It certainly was revealed at that point that RS&H wanted more money before they released the final account. It was their leverage, as it were. It turned out that it was the cost consultant needing more money from RS&H, and RS&H wanted to pass that cost on to the authority. of course, we denied this, and there was a lot of back and forth, and that's when we started the beginning of legal advice as to what. I should also add as well that we did receive in probably May 2020 a final account that was very, very poorly written. There were many errors, many still provisional sums, repeat numbers, and we just literally threw it back. And there was a back and forth with RS&H to come up with a final account that actually made sense, and we're still not there yet. We're close, but not there yet. And we are meeting in early mid-February to discuss this.
I get the sense that there is a general sense of there's no urgency to complete this thing. We'll ask for this, and if we don't get it, we'll wait a couple of months. If you need to have a meeting now, and it's a month from now before you're having the meeting. Yet we were given evidence this morning that we could assure us that would not exceed 74,030,000. But you're saying now that you don't really have a final agreement.
We don't have a final account.
What's the difference?
So we have a draft final account with a number, which is the 61.9 million. If anything, it will get lower. It will not get any higher.
Well, in 2018, the project was said to have overrun to cost 64 million. How come we now, the project haven't been completed, there's no work being done, but we're looking for another 10 million in cost?
So you're referring to the 2018 audit report?
Right.
So that was produced in 2018. We still had a year's worth of construction to go at that point. Like I said, project finished construction-wise in July 2019, a full year later.
So, but the majority of the construction has been completed. It was mostly interior work, etc., that had to be done.
No, that's not true. We still had the second floor administration level to do. We had the South Arch, what I call Phase 5 and Phase 4 South. That was still ongoing. The hurricane glass was still being installed right through till past His Royal Highness's visit on the south side. So there was still active work going on the south side.
But, yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to sort of pursue this line, when we did the report, we were working to try and work out the revised final costs, which is
right.
where we got to the 64 million
right.
in Exhibit 2. So I suppose it would be helpful if we're potentially going up to 74 million to understand which of the areas. Is it all on Phase 2 and 3 construction?
Well, in 2018, it will be in all areas, basically. The Phase 4, Phase 5, Phase 2 South. Phase 2 South was broken into 5 sub-phases. It gets very complicated.
But just to come in, those were all under contract of a price for the contractor. These were not new contracts that were being signed that were not part of the original contract.
This is correct, yes.
Okay, so
However,
the question is, having agreed on whatever the cost was and awarded the contract, why did those areas cost $10 million more than original costed?
So contractual claims for delay. Again, Phase 2 South, that I can't remember when that came online. I'd have to look in there. But because we didn't have a baggage handling system, Phase 2, which was all supposed to be completed together, was actually broke into Phase 2 North, Phase 2 South. And so the 10 million was a myriad of variations relating to many things. It could be design changes, unforeseen changes, client changes. For instance, to give you an example, when we got into demolition of the departure hall, the bag search area had to be demolished. Well, the operations needed a bag search area, so we actually built a bag search room, a temporary one. This was never on the tender drawings.
But all of that should have been anticipated in the design of the project and the planning of the project. Everybody knew that this was going to be a project that had to be done while it was operational. The decision that it would continue to operate was not a decision after the design and the costing was done. So are you telling me that none of that was taken into account when they did the original costing and the original planning for the rollout and development of the project?
That's correct. The RSNH didn't allow for things like this, but I come back to the risk allowance. There are certain things in an operational airport, a very, very complicated facility, where you need a risk allowance to combat these things. An architect cannot think of everything. And sometimes things, for instance, if you have a head of the department of, say, immigration, if that leader changes, or maybe a regulation changes during construction. This construction went on for 3 years. You know, sometimes regulations can change the way you do things. You know, for instance, the in-transit lounge, there was not a need for an in-transit lounge. So all of that was changed. So all of this is risk that you take on, but you can't plan on it.
But here's the problem I have with that statement. While I agree with you, how is it possible then that the Civil Aviation Authority, the steering committee, reduced the risk from 20+% to 6%?
Now that I don't know. I can't answer that. I wasn't here. But if
Because I would hazard a guess that it seemed to be that this project was just started wrongly.
Correct. In my experience, a project will end the way it starts. And I believe that this project was poorly set up by the design team.
No, sir, I can't blame the design team for that, because the design team only did what the government, what the Civil Aviation Authority Board asked them to do. So it was the Civil Aviation Board who should have been instructing the design team what they needed, and certainly they should have been aware of all the things that you just mentioned, of all these difficulties that were going to crop up. And evidence before us is that the reason RS&H was selected because they were so good, and they had done it so many other places. You know, but I guess they're not here today, so they're taking the blame for everything. We'll see what happens if we decide to call them. I don't know if there's very much more that we can ask, because we're basically not getting anywhere. Nobody's taking responsibility for anything. It's just, well, you know, it was this, it was that, and when as project manager, did you have any reason to believe or suspect that the contractors used the delays to inflate their price? And were they rewarded for delays that were not their fault in allowing prices to increase?
No, I have no inclination of that.
Any other questions? Okay, sir, thank you very much for your time, and wish you well.
Thank you very much.
tomorrow morning we have the contractor, Mike Alpine, and the chief officer for the minister coming in. So the meeting is adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning.